In this demonstration, we're going to look at how to allocate manufacturing overhead costs to products using both traditional costing and activity-based costing. In our example problem here, we read that Racket King Corp manufactures titanium and aluminum tennis rackets. Racket King's total overhead costs consist of assembly costs and inspection costs. Those are the two activity cost pools that the company has previously identified. The following information is available. In the assembly cost pool, there is total allocated overhead costs of $30,000. Assembly is based on machine hours, and the titanium racket is responsible for 500 machine hours. The aluminum racket responsible for the same 500 machine hours. In the inspections activity cost pool, there's total manufacturing overhead cost of $50,000 allocated. The titanium racket requires 350 inspections product-wide. The aluminum racket just 150. Total overhead costs for the company are $80,000. Just the sum of the two individual activity cost pools. From a labor standpoint, direct labor, the titanium racket is responsible for 2,100 labor hours product-wide, and the aluminum racket 1,900 labor hours. We read that Racket King is considering switching from one overhead rate based on those labor hours to activity-based costing based on the assembly and inspections activity cost pools. Determine the amount of overhead that would be allocated to each product using traditional costing and activity-based costing. If Racket King continues to use traditional costing, overhead costs will be allocated to products based on a single overhead rate that again was going to be based on direct labor hours. So if that were the case, Racket King would calculate a predetermined overhead rate, and that rate would be the total estimated overhead cost for the entire period, $80,000, divided by the total estimated activity base, in this case labor hours. So that's the 2,100 labor hours for titanium and 1,900 labor hours for the aluminum racket. We see that that is $20, and again that's $20 per labor hour. If we were to allocate overhead costs to each individual product, we would do so on the basis of that predetermined overhead rate. So for the titanium product, we would allocate $20 per labor hour times the 2,100 labor hours that are incurred by the titanium product for a total of $42,000. The aluminum product would receive an allocation in a similar manner. $20 per labor hour, again that was our predetermined overhead rate, times the 1,900 labor hours that the aluminum product generates. That's a total of $38,000. So here we've allocated all $80,000 of our overhead costs, $42,000 to the titanium product, $38,000 to the aluminum product. If Racket King switches to an activity-based costing system, those overhead costs will be allocated in a different manner. Under activity-based costing, we calculate a predetermined activity rate for each activity cost pool. So we would need an activity rate for assembly and for inspections. We calculate activity rates in a similar manner to our single predetermined overhead rates by taking the estimated cost divided by the estimated activity for that particular cost pool. So for assembly, it would be the $30,000 in overhead costs that have been allocated to that cost pool divided by the total activity in that cost pool. That's the 500 machine hours driven by the titanium product and the 500 machine hours driven by the aluminum product. That tells us that the activity rate for assembly is $30 per machine hour. Be careful here to factor in all the activity across all your products, regardless of how many that is. So the inspections activity rate would be calculated in a similar manner. $50,000 in costs have been allocated to that cost pool, divided by the total amount of activity in that cost pool. That's the 350 inspections required by titanium, plus the 150 inspections required by the aluminum product. That tells us the activity rate for inspections is $100 per inspection. Now when we go to allocate the overhead to these products, we need to do so on the basis of those activity rates. So if we look at the titanium product first, it required 500 machine hours in the assembly cost pool. So 500 machine hours of activity times the $30 per machine hour activity rate for assembly means we're allocating $15,000 to the titanium product for assembly. Similar situation for inspections. Titanium product requires 350 inspections. So we multiply that by the activity rate for inspections, that $100 per inspection. And there we've allocated $35,000 based on the inspections cost pool. So in total, we've allocated $50,000 in overhead to the titanium product. Now we'll do the same for aluminum. For the assembly cost pool, we take the 500 machine hours incurred by the aluminum product and multiply that by our $30 per machine hour assembly activity rate, $15,000. Do the same for inspections. 150 inspections required by the aluminum product times the $100 activity rate for inspections gives us $15,000 in allocated cost. So in total, we're allocating $30,000 in overhead to the aluminum product and $50,000 in overhead cost to the titanium product. As you can see, this is significantly different than the amounts allocated under traditional costing. This highlights one of the ways in which activity-based costing is, in theory, more precise than our traditional costing methods.